Welcome to the SENDcast. My name is Dale Pickles. I'm the host of the SENDcast and the managing director of B Squared. If you are a new listener, then welcome to the SENDcast. The aim of the SENDcast is really simple. We want to reach lots of people and help everyone learn more about special educational needs and disability. On this week's episode, we discussed Improve, Not Prove, how schools can use self-evaluation for continuous improvement around inclusion. I was joined by Maria Dawes, the CEO from Schools Alliance for Excellence, a school-led company that provides school improvement, curriculum and leadership development for schools in Surrey and other local regions. And we had a really good conversation around inclusion, what inclusion looks like. And it's not a nice, simple, these are the 5 steps you do. It's a conversation for every school to have that looks different in every single school. The SENDcast is created and produced by us here at B Squared. We are the assessment people. We are known for helping schools to show the small steps of progress pupils with SEND make. And over the last few years, we have been creating an inclusive assessment system that can be used with all pupils in primary schools. The system has different levels of detail for different levels of ability, but it makes looking at whole school data and comparing your SEND pupils and your non-SEND pupils really simple. It also reduces teacher workload by only having one system to use, and our new features to simplify report writing are really good. And as well, it saves schools money by just having one system. Visit the B Squared website or click on the meeting link in the show notes to book a meeting with me. I can take you through our assessment software and how it can help you. Now, I'm going to let you get on with the podcast. In this week's show, we're discussing Improve, Not Prove, how schools can use self-evaluation for continuous improvement around inclusion. My guest is Maria Dawes. Maria is the CEO from the Schools Alliance for Excellence, a school-led company that provides school improvement, curriculum and leadership development for schools in Surrey and other local regions. Maria believes strongly in equity of opportunity and inclusion, and her previous roles include a number of senior leadership posts in schools, Senior HMI and Deputy and Regional Schools Commissioner. Welcome, Maria.
Hello, Dale. Lovely to be with you.
Looking forward to this. Inclusion is a big focus for schools, local authorities and government. It's almost going to be the buzzword for 2025, I think. But before we dive into the self-evaluation, how inclusive are schools right now? How much work is there to do?
Gosh, that is a huge question, and I think the $1 million question. I think I'd start by saying that schools are working incredibly hard to be inclusive. That's my experience. We've got 400 state schools in Surrey and a whole raft of independent schools and also a huge range of early years providers and FE colleges. And I think a real focus is inclusion and trying to be inclusive. And I think but I think there's a number of challenges, and I think that what's really clear with everything that's coming out through the DFE is that they're going to have to be more inclusive, and I think inclusion's a really wide. It's a really wide definition. Are we talking about children with special educational needs? Are we talking about children who are coming from economically deprived backgrounds? Are we talking about children who are different ethnic minorities or anything, or any vulnerability? I think that schools are really trying, but I think there's a number of things that stop them. I think one is the availability of support from outside, and I think so it's those external factors and that external support, and we all know the stories and the challenges that local authorities have. There just isn't any money anywhere, particularly with a 150% increase in EHCP since we introduced them in 2014. I think that there is a need in schools to upskill some of the teachers and the staff, because the very great majority of teachers were trained before this was a real focus where actually the training you'd have at doing your PGCE or your degree in supporting children with SEND was very minimal. I also think that there's a challenge in some schools that there's a bit of a deficit model, and we're always trying to fix a problem as opposed to looking at the much wider problem about the thing that we have to do is make sure our quality of teaching, our pedagogy is fit for everybody. And then the last thing I think is that there's also been this real there hasn't been an incentive, a disincentive, that's the word, I couldn't think of it, the disincentive of the accountability system and the top-down accountability system, which is, where are you in your performance tables? How are you doing in Ofsted? And that top-down accountability has really, I think, meant that there's been a disincentive for schools to be as inclusive. So I think we've gone a long way. I think there's a real will to be more inclusive. There's a need to be more inclusive, and schools are going to have to be inclusive. But goodness me, there's a number of barriers that I think we've got to address if we are going to get that.
Definitely. And I think the league tables is my biggest issue, the fact that in reality, less SEN in your schools make you look better.
Absolutely.
So the incentives are to not have SEN because you're up the league tables and all of that. And that is my biggest issue. And that is the incentive, and that often defines the intent of the school.
Absolutely.
And once you have that intent, everything else in that school will follow that.
Yeah, and I think, Dale, if you throw into that, which I think is really interesting, and I am hopeful here with the France's curriculum and assessment review, the curriculum is not totally fit for purpose, and I think we've got to look at things in a different way. And what I am hopeful of is with Becky France's background and the work that she's led at the EEF and the focus that they have on some of our most underserved and vulnerable children and young people, we will come out with a more inclusive, a more inclusive curriculum.
So at the time of recording this, which is mid-January, we're hoping by now, when this comes out in March, we will have some form of announcements from maybe the interim curriculum and assessment review. And hopefully that when you're hearing this, there's been lots of amazing good news and everything's going to be fixed. Probably not, but it'd be lovely to know that actually, yes. But to me, there's lots of things in the curriculum. For me, obviously, me and assessment are very important. But I'm hoping that we really look at how we do assessment across the board and move away from everything being high stakes end of GCSEs exams.
Absolutely, and because I think there's so many different ways of assessing, and assessments, summative assessments are, they're an end point. That it still frustrates me how many people, how we define, how we still define success by how many GCSEs you've got or how many A levels you've got, and that's often defines how somebody is for so many years in the future, and it's a snapshot of a particular thing, and I think that we need to be much broader, and we need to look much bigger. I think the other thing which we also when this comes out, because we don't know when we're recording this, is what Ofsted are going to say, which I think it is something that I think will make inclusion a more central focus, but and we'll have greater clarity on what that looks like as well.
So, as an organisation, there has been created the Surrey Inclusion Framework.
Yep.
What's that for? What does that do?
Well, I suppose where we started from is, I think at the heart of the development of that was our focus that we've had in Surrey and at Schools Alliance for Excellence on wanting pupils, underserved pupils with additional needs, those who are disadvantaged, underserved, or got, to be honest, any other vulnerabilities. We want them to enjoy educational equity, which provides every possible opportunity for them to achieve their best. We want it's right at the heart of what we do. We want everyone to have chances and choices as they move forward into the next stage of their education and life. And I suppose when we were thinking about it, we know that at its best, we sort of have combined that with with the knowledge that at its best, robust self-evaluation supports continuous school improvement. And so what we've done is bring those two things together around inclusion. I think we worried quite a lot that regardless of what Ofsted say, actually we want to place the power back into the hands of head teachers. So what our inclusion framework does is it supports schools to engage in really rich discussions, a rigorous and robust self-evaluation around inclusion, which then in turn allows the leaders in schools to give them the freedom to take the responsibility for their own actions. So it's not about saying, in terms of self-evaluation at the moment, most schools are led by what Ofsted says. And that then leads to sometimes, as we've already mentioned, perverse incentives. Now, we don't know what Ofsted are going to say, but we shouldn't be hanging around waiting for them. We should be saying, we know our schools best. And so what we decided is that we wanted a framework to give schools and leaders and governors the ability to do that. So the development of the framework was led by the fabulous Kenny Wheeler, who is our inclusion lead. It goes beyond the Ofsted framework. We identified 9, what we've called, I suppose we've called them dimensions, nine dimensions, which are wider than the Ofsted dimension. So we do look at the current Ofsted bits of intent and implementation and impact. But, for example, we've got one of the dimensions is the effective use of teaching assistants. That is so important. One of them is around provision mapping for disadvantaged and SEND children and young people. One is about how schools work with parents of children who are vulnerable. And so we developed a number of questions under each of the 9 dimensions for schools to look at. And schools then can evaluate themselves against those, from whether they're beginning to whether it's embedded. And that's just really the beginning. The questions are there really to get conversation going, but we also wanted something that was easy for schools to use. So we worked with a company called Evaluate My School, who do a lot of self-evaluations. It's a great app, really, that schools could use to ensure that we had a really friendly and accessible platform for schools. So they can then use the app to record the outcomes of the evaluation. We've said to the schools that are using it, and we've got about 180 schools that have been using it, you could use it how you want to use it. We're not expecting you to go through each of the 9 dimensions and answer each of the questions. You can do, but you might want to just choose one dimension. And we've had schools that have said, right, we know we want to focus on use of teaching assistants, so we're going to just use that one dimension, and we're going to test our thoughts with the senior leadership team, with middle leaders. We're going to test it with our SENCo and our teaching assistants, and then that starts those conversations going, and then helps the school to identify where their strengths are, what needs to happen next, and then to have the really rich conversations about and what do we now need to do to action plan. That's a quick whiz through what we've been doing. We have developed a guide because we sort of thought, gosh, that's quite a lot to take on. So we've developed a guide, and we've also got some case studies, which we've been working with schools. We worked with a number of schools and asked them to write case studies, including a special school, including a MAT, primary and secondary, to see where we go with that.
So with inclusion, I think what everyone would love is you to give them a 10-point checklist of do these 10 things and you'll be inclusive. And that just will never exist.
Nope.
Because what inclusion looks like in school A is not what it looks like in school G or P or T. It's going to be completely different. But across all those schools, you're going to have some common trends, which are probably your dimensions, that these are the areas you need to think about. But even in each of them, within that dimension, what that looks like will be different for each school, depending on what the challenges are, the type of need, the type of pupils, the build. There are so many factors. So you can't give them a very prescriptive, this is what you need to be. It's about having a framework which allows you to have the conversations. It structures the conversations. It allows you to reflect on where you are and talk about and going, actually, we're not doing great in this area, or we feel. What can we do? And it therefore gives you an area to focus on and work on. And it might be that you're reaching out to other schools to see what they're doing, or it might be, actually, we can't really improve this area because of this. Cool.
Yeah.
How can we overcome that? And it might be a bigger, longer term project.
I think it is. I think it's huge. Inclusion really is. It is huge. And I suppose if I'm going to be really honest, I think something that I worry a lot about is that I'm a little bit worried that we'll get Ofsted. Well, we will get Ofsted coming actually, and we're going to have Ofsted, and Ofsted are going to suddenly say, this is our definition of inclusion, this is how we're going to measure it, and then that's what schools are going to be measuring against, and they're going to be trying to meet those criteria. And I think what's really important, and this is where our principles come, is that I think so. Three things really for me that are really important. One is putting together a framework which promotes discussions, really deep discussions, which gives clarity around what's making a difference and what will make a difference in your own setting. I think we wanted a framework which gives leaders the freedom to take responsibility for their own actions. And at the end of the day, and I feel very strongly about this, schools should be the experts of their own setting. Because as you said, it is the school, not just you as the head, but you as the head, along with your senior leadership team, along with your SENCO, along with your middle leaders, along with your teachers, along with your TAs, along with your dinner ladies, let's be honest, that they are the expert of their schools, and you live and breathe your school. So that's what, when we talk about improving, not proving, that's really where we're coming from. Those three principles: clarity around what will make a difference and what will make a difference in your context, having the freedom to take responsibility for your own actions, and actually being experts in your setting.
I'm hoping Ofsted will not define what or how it looks like, because I think as soon as they do that, people will try and fit to that mould. And I know Ofsted have learned from this in the past when they say, this is what a good lesson looks like. Suddenly everything became that good lesson and where the teacher stood. And I remember questions going, if it's a good lesson, should I stand in the front of the classroom or where should I be? And I was literally going, surely you kind of know from your style. And once Ofsted say something, people will then follow that. So I'm hoping Ofsted won't, but I'm also hoping that people out there won't go, this is the answer on how you make your school inclusive. Just do these 5 things. And then people will go, oh, if I do these 4 things, we're inclusive. No, that's not how it works.
No,
And my favourite, oh, go on.
yeah,
You
I
go.
was going to say there are a few. We know that there are certain things there are certain things that you can do. We know that if what we want to do is make our schools more neurodiverse friendly, for example, there are certain things that you can do. We know that there are certain things you can do, for example, if you want to be more dyslexia friendly, for example, or which little tricks, if that I'd call them tricks, but really important things like the color of your PowerPoints, for example, and there are things that you can do, but it doesn't make you fundamentally more inclusive, because inclusivity is a culture. And you asked the question, Dale, right at the beginning about are our schools inclusive? And I think that they're on a journey, but actually it's for me for me success is always about how well you do for your most vulnerable children and young people. And if you and that can be a real mindset shift to actually say, right, we're going to come in at the bottom and make sure that our culture supports everybody upwards, rather than say we do it all for here for these children, and for the majority, and then we'll ping them up. We'll do a bit of remedial work, and
We'll
you
fill
know,
in the gaps where there's missing bits. We'll do
yeah,
that bit.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So my favourite definition of inclusion is how the students feel. It's not how much you do. It's not the way you do it. Do your students
yeah,
feel included? And so when it's not Ofsted you've got to be worrying about, it's your students in your school.
absolutely.
Do your students, do the parents of those children feel their child is included? Are they as thought about? Are they are the things on school trips, school plays, the playground, the lunches, the lesson? Is that child feeling part of it, or are they going, oh no, I don't do that way. It's just the way it is.
Yeah,
Are there things like that's the bit that's going to define it?
yeah. I suppose I would say it's how well everyone feels they belong. It
Yes,
is about belonging, and I know I'm sort of jumping on a bandwagon, but I do think it's about
it's
belonging.
true.
And we did in works. I worked last year with secondary heads. So we've got 58 secondary schools in state secondary schools in Surrey, and 36 of them were involved in this. That they did we called it a belonging and inclusion survey, and we had about 20,000 responses across the schools. And one of the questions we asked, and it was mostly year 7 to 10, but also some year 12s, we sent it out just after the year 11s had gone on study leave, but so mostly 7 to 10. And the majority of the students, one of the questions was about how well they felt they belong, and the majority did feel that they belonged. However, there was still a sizable minority of children that didn't feel that they belonged. And there'll be all sorts of reasons for that. And you could break it down into whether they were girls or boys, and we were looking at it from protected characteristic perspective, so
Yeah.
ethnicity, sex, sexuality, etc., etc. But you can do the same with any sort of vulnerability, and that's the question: how well do all your children feel that they belong, and how well? And for me, inclusivity is how well are you preparing them to ensure that they all have the chances, the choices. That Sonia Blanford used that in her book Chances and Choices, and how are we supporting those children um, to to make their own choices? What are we giving them to make their own choices? How are we preparing them to have their own chances, whatever that might be?
So within that secondary school survey, were there groups? where it was really identifiable that they did not have such a strong sense of belonging, or was it kind of across the board? It was the same sort of percentage, or were there some groups you're going, actually, we do have a problem here?
Yeah, so interestingly, children that were either identifying, they were identifying as part of the LGBTQ plus group, for example, that was really interesting, that they were feeling less that they belonged. They also felt that they were being more discriminated against, actually, so that was really interesting that we haven't still quite got that right yet. We think we've come a long way, but we have come a long way. We have come a huge way. We really have. But at the same time, potentially we haven't come as far as we think. I think it's also children that were from minority ethnic groups, often felt that they were not all of them. Again, it isn't by any means all of them, but again, there's still some feel that they're not as included as some of the other groups. So I think it's I think it's really interesting when you look at the sort of the outcomes that came out of that.
And there's things you can do. So my daughter's primary school, we live in quite a lovely area in Berkshire. I grew up in Croydon, which was a very mixed ethnic area, lots going on. Come to this area and it's predominantly white.
Yeah.
So when you talk about feeling included, if actually you have those conversations, it's like, actually, it's hard to feel included with such small numbers. There's limited things you can do.
Yeah.
Cool, but what can you do? That's always that question. What can we do?
I think there's lots of things that we can do. We can. I think it depends on what the groups are, but I think it's all it. I think we've got to, as teachers, we have to be aware that there are differences. We're never going to get rid of differences, and there's nothing wrong with there being differences. But I think we have to be able to. We have to be able to be understanding of that. We have to be. We have to be allies. I think we've got to explore what it's like to be in a different vulnerable group. I don't think we understand that. I think if I take one of the biggest vulnerable groups that we have in Surrey, well, it's still not huge, but it's one of our biggest challenges for our outcomes. It's children that that come from poorer backgrounds, children that that are identified as disadvantaged. I don't like the word disadvantaged because I think it's a very deficit model, but children that are living in economic poverty. Now, I'm not sure we really understand. I think we've got to get over that our lack of understanding of those children, and we have to be able to be their allies. We have to make sure we support them. If we're talking about in terms of inclusion, if we're talking about ethnicity, it is little things such as making sure that we have a diverse curriculum. It is about making sure that we have that we haven't erased the history of some of the awful things we've done in this country. It is about celebrating their difference, because it's not and it is about, because one of the things that came out that I was quite shocked about in our sort of belonging survey was that too many children and young people didn't feel that they knew how to report any times there was some sort of discrimination. It might not have even been a massive discrimination, but they knew exactly how to do it. They just didn't feel that they they didn't think it was worth it, if that makes sense. Because they said nothing's going to happen. And so we have to be able to make sure that everyone knows, not only knows the process, but also knows that feels that it's a worthwhile process.
And I know my daughter at her school, secondary school, has kind of seen things reported or reported things, and it kind of been dismissed by someone else. And it's like, if it gets dismissed, you won't report it. But it's that culture of actually that person, it was discriminatory, that was said, that did happen, it shouldn't have, and that will have an impact on someone.
It will. And one of the things that we've been doing, actually, we did last year, it's been really brilliant, is that we worked with a charity called Diverse Educators that is led by two fabulous people, Benny Cara and can't think of the other person's name. Anyway, it'll come back to me in a sec. And we worked with 20 schools where we had the head plus somebody else, and we were working with them to become sort of innovative and sort of champion diversity leaders, diversity and inclusion leaders. So that's been really brilliant, because it included things like giving how to give your staff the skills to challenge discrimination in any form, that when things are said in the wrong way. And that's not just about sort of ethnicity, it's not just about children from different sexual orientation, it's also about that vulnerability for children that are living in poverty. It's about challenging when somebody in the staff room says something like, well, yeah, Dale didn't do so well, but what can you expect? He comes from the estate, or hear that all the time, or, oh well, what did you? Yeah, Dale's done really well. Look, he's just done it, but that's brilliant, given that he's got a special educational need. And how I think we've got, that's what I mean by changing the culture. But to change the culture, you have to give people the skills to be able to yeah, does that make sense, Dale? The skills to be able to say something.
It's also it's that tone you're taking. So that what you talk about there makes me think of my daughter hates anything around neurodiversity week or autism acceptance week at her school, because generally they are focusing on more impacted autistic pupils who might be wearing ear defenders, can't socialise, are at home, struggle with things, and then say this is autism.
Yeah.
Anyone who does more than this with autism is amazing, and it's such a negative picture. And there are people in their school who have a diagnosis of autism going, that's not me, that's nothing like me. My daughter does not want the fact she is autistic shared with the school because of how people in the school see autism. And how they champion it and go, oh, you're autistic, you can't do this stuff, but well done, with a big thumbs up type thing. No, my daughter is great at things and struggles at things. She just needs a bit of support where she struggles without being belittled or anything, just met where she is and supported.
But don't you think, Dale, that if you take one of the things that I've always thought with special educational needs is that, whilst we only have about 4%, and it's increasing, of children, 3.5%, 4% of children with EHCPs, and then there's another sort of 12-15% of children that are identified on SEND support, SENK, whatever you want to call it. I think if you just take that EHCP cohort, the diversity within that, the huge difference. If you take neurodiversity, if you can cut it so many different ways. You can't just say it's very easy to get a label, and I think that's again the culture. And one of the things we try and pick up on in terms of school improvement, in terms of the work that we do and the inclusion framework, that labels are useful, because labels are now sometimes to to cut things statistically. I'm a mathematician. I started my life as a secondary maths teacher. I love a bar graph. I love a histogram. I really do. However, actually, it it masks the reality, and I think that's why this is so complex. I think it's so complex.
But I also think that when we think of SEND, we always think of low attainment, which is kind of, they need support with their education. But neurodiversity isn't always in that group.
No.
And that's the weird thing with neurodiversity. They go, there's this number of SEND. Yeah, but actually, if you do the counts of how many dyslexic you're likely to have in your classroom, how many autistic pupils, how many ADHDers in your classroom, there's more. But that's not SEND. It's not. Some of them will be SEND, but some of them will need support in other ways. And so it's not really a SEND inclusion. It's a neuro-inclusive. There are so many different ways, but we focus on SEND. But it's like, no, there's more than the educational needs.
Yeah. And I think you can take that. You can take one of the other definitions we have for SEND, which is SEMH, and I think what I find interesting is if you unpick the acronym social, emotional, and mental health. It's beyond me how we use that as a definition when we all have social, emotional, and mental health. And our social, emotional, and mental health changes on a day-to-day basis. And my mental health today is different to that yesterday. And there are things that come in, and some people's SEMH needs they're so environmental. Was talking to a fabulous head over at Epsom Downs school, and we were talking, and she, for example, she was telling me it's 3 elementary primary school. It serves a challenging demographic. She's got 40 children in her school who don't have their own bed. It's not bedroom. They don't have their own bed. And for those 40 children, that is something that's impacting on their social, emotional, and mental health. Of course it is. If you've not got your own bed, if you're in that circumstances. So is that a SEND issue? I don't think it is a SEND issue, but it's still an inclusion issue. It's still, the chances are, I suppose the other bit, I'm wittering a little bit, but the other thing is that because of the social environmental issues that are causing some of these children to have additional social, emotional, and mental health challenges, that then can lead to lack of engagement in schools. That then it can often lead to behaviours that are challenging and that our staff don't know how to manage. That in turn can lead to the child starting to get behind, not make as much progress as they should do. They start to not make progress as they should do. For example, maybe their reading's not as great, or their writing, or their maths, and then the next thing they're being assessed for a special educational, for an EHCP, when actually that's not what they need. They need to have their social, emotional, and mental health needs understood. And so we at SAFE, and actually in Surrey, are really passionate about this. Again, we've been one of the things that I think is making a real difference is we were quite lucky in that we bid. So SAFE did this. We did this alongside a group of schools, and we bid to a fund, mental health investment fund, and we were successful in getting £500,000, which we're now working with Nurture UK. So we've got just over a quarter of our schools actually working, and on having sort of 18-month training on becoming a much more nurturing school, so where they get to use the Boxall profile, and they get trained on the Boxall profile, and they get they get it for free actually for the 18 months, so they can identify the social, emotional and mental health needs of those of some of the children that are displaying more challenging behaviour in their schools, and then they can put an action plan and they can train their staff in how to deal with that. That is bringing us back around to how do you make schools more inclusive, and and one of the things that Anya at Epsom Downs is doing, and she's been doing this for quite a long time, is being really successful in integrating these children, including their children, and becoming more inclusive, so these children actually can start to thrive. And when they start to thrive, then they can start to learn. Then they're in school, their attendance is better. Then they're learning not just academically, but they're learning socially as well. So I think that's how we develop our inclusive schools.
There's a big hole, and I look at the picture from the outside without taking any workloads on. I see, kind of, as you said, someone's mental health starts deteriorating. It deteriorates. They get less engaged in school. They become, and at some point, they then become on the SEND register.
Yeah.
Then it gets further behind. They get EHCP. But it's like, cool. But where's the bit before they went onto the SEND register? Where's that remit? And to me, when I heard of mental health leads in school, I was like, yes, we're going somewhere with this. And they created the mental health leads. And that's the job done, it seems. We've got mental health leads in schools. We've fixed the problem. No, actually, there should be something around this, because there are children struggling who will not feel included. That's going to... they're the children who could be struggling with attendance and things like that, persistent disruptive behaviour. It's around mental health. That's not special needs. Yes, SEMH is one of the 4 broad areas, but it's their mental health that needs supporting.
I agree, but I also think it's got to also be, all of those things have got to be holistic in the school, and
Yes.
I don't know whether you'd agree, but I think too much of the time, I think there's too much pressure put on Senkos. Our Senkos are under such pressure. I think it's the most amazing job you can do. I think it's probably one of the hardest jobs that you can do. And at the
Yeah.
moment, our Senkos are struggling under the burden of
But
so much paperwork, and everything's coming back to them. Whereas actually, it's not solely their responsibility. It's not just if you have a mental health lead in a school, that's not going to solve your problems. It's got to be holistic. It's got to be whole school. That's the really key. That's the
it's
key of this. This is a whole school approach. It's everybody thinking inclusion first. Inclusion first. What can we do to ensure that we break down those barriers, so that you know that picture that we always have, that so many people use, of the children trying to peer over a
the
fence,
fence.
and one way is to sort of you make sure that you have blocks of different sizes so they're all level. Actually, for me, it's the next picture that sometimes we don't always see, is just rip down the fence. We've all got to be, that's where we need to be aiming, that there is no fence, there are no barriers. There will be barriers, however, but it's everybody's responsibility. Send is everybody's responsibility. Inclusion is everybody's responsibility.
And I think that thing of it's kind of waiting for the Senko to pick up some of these things, which is just increasing their
Oh,
workload.
yeah,
There should be that mental health should be proactive and going, and people should be going, thinking about mental health and going, actually, I've got a child in my class who's really struggling. And something is done when that is noticed, not when they fall academically behind, that they
yeah,
then get picked up with Senko.
yeah.
We know early intervention works, we know all these things, the stats are there, but we're still not doing it for mental health. And we should be.
No, we've got to do it for all of them. And mental health is a huge bit. But you see, the thing is, if we don't all do it, it's not going to be sustainable. And I think we've also got to get our head round It's a really difficult thing, actually. I've really changed. If I'm being really honest, this is this is my 40th year in teaching. I'm not that I'm teaching at the moment, but I started teaching 40 years ago. And I'm sort of thinking what I learned then is very different. The way I would do things very, very differently now. But it's changing a mindset, it's changing our thinking, it's realizing it's realizing that the things that we, particularly with the pandemic, I think that the things that we would have done before the pandemic, which would have worked in our classrooms and would have worked for our children, are not working now. Those things, that's why we have to have, I think, a bit of a real reset. To have a reset, and I'm bringing it back to the inclusion framework, because to have a reset, you have to have a real deep understanding of what is happening in your school. You've really got to be thinking, okay, have I asked the right questions? Have I had the right conversations? Have I brought the right people in to have these conversations? Do I know what's working? Do I know what isn't working? When I've identified what not just what the symptoms are, but what the root cause is, what can I then do to move forward? I can only pick two, or I should in a school only pick two or three of those, because that's all that's doable, to be honest. And then they've got to be a whole school approach, that's got to involve everybody. It's got to involve the teachers, it's got to involve the teaching assistants, it's got to involve the other staff, it's actually got to involve the parents and the wider community. And I think that's what, for me, that's what's really important, and that for me is going to be a real challenge in the next few months, when we have yet again an organisation like Ofsted, I've been there, worked for Ofsted, supported led the development of a framework quite a few frameworks ago, but I know that there's a risk that we're then going to go back to just thinking about what Ofsted said, not necessarily making it, taking the responsibility ourselves, because we need to be accepting that we need to accept that we know best. Or if,
Yes.
as a head of in a school, as the staff in your school, they know the best. They know their context. Make those judgments. Take control. Make those changes.
So one of my questions, you talked about doing this survey with all the schools in Surrey, and there were
Secondary.
56 schools, and there were
Yeah.
secondaries. There were how many involved in the survey?
There were in the second one, we had 36 in the first one, which was a couple of years ago, and 30 we had. Yeah.
So my question around that is, did the head teachers from those schools lead on it, or were they more facilitating? Because I think one of these things, for inclusion to really work, I think your head teacher needs to be seen leading it, that they believe in it. It's not, oh, this is just a bit of a project we're doing for Maria to make her happy. We're believing in it and we're doing it because we want the best for our children.
Yeah, so
the
heads were very passionate about it. So particularly in the second one, I well, actually in both of them, they bought into it because they were paying for it as a phase council. So they all are in a group called the Secondary Phase Council, and the Phase Council paid for it because none of this happens for free. So they they were very bought into it, and they have been very bought into it. And as a result of the survey, that's why a number of them have gone on to do our diverse leaders training. Our secondary schools are very passionate about this. Particularly, as I said, the survey that we did was less around SEND, and more around the protected characteristics. And it's something that they know, particularly since it didn't, the results the first one were quite poor around some of the protected characteristics. They know that they're very passionate about wanting to make a difference because why is it that male students are more like than female students are more likely to feel that they belong? Why is it that transgender and non-binary students, along with those, for example, the Gypsy Roma traveller community, are the least likely to feel that they belong? Why is it, to be honest? I'm just looking at the results here. Why is it that whilst the results have improved, we've still got 30% of all of the children and young people that responded that said they didn't belong? That's nearly a third. That's a lot, isn't it?
That's a high number.
It's a
And
real.
when did you run the survey the first time?
We ran the survey in 2022, so outcomes have improved, and I'm maybe thinking about it. Well, one would expect that, Dale, because 20 in secondary schools in 2022. By the time we got to 2022, most we'd just come out of COVID, hadn't we? If you think about it, we had 3 lockdowns, and some of these children, we had only just been back in school for that for the 2021-22 year. So I think it's good that it's really improved, but it's also it's also interesting that the differences between the different characteristic groups. I think a thing that we'd probably be really interested in doing, I'd be, we might look at doing, is thinking, well, what do we do for children that are identified as economically disadvantaged? How do we break that down to children, for example, that are identified with SEND in a mainstream school? How do we do it for some of the other vulnerable groups that aren't classified as don't have haven't got a protected characteristic, so classifications such as young carers? Because I think that's a whole nother ball game, or children that are looked after.
And even with young carers, that's a voluntary label.
It's a voluntary. It is, yeah. It is a voluntary label. And then the other bit is the other thing that I think is really interesting in all of this work, and again bringing it back to SEND, is that it's each child is an individual, and so many children have multiple vulnerabilities. So we use these broad labels such as SEND or additional needs. We try in Surrey not to use the words special educational needs. I mean, we do because you have to for legal. That's the DFE's definition. But we asked our children and young people, and they really didn't like that, so we called it additional needs as opposed to SEND. But children with additional needs are a broad spectrum, and then so many children that have got additional needs might also be living in poverty. So many of those children might be children that have a different ethnicity. There's so many multiple vulnerabilities that that's what makes inclusion really difficult, but it makes it really exciting.
Because you could have children, let's go for sexuality, with completely different experiences based on family and various other factors. And one could feel really supportive, or it's kind of, there are things that bring you together, but there's just as many differences. And it's interesting. SEND is what we use SEND in England. In Scotland, it's ASN, additional support needs, and in Wales, it's additional learning needs. The rest of the world, it's still SEND.
Yeah, absolutely.
In lots of places, it's an international term, but it is a term that is kind of people are going off.
I think so, yeah. I also think it's interesting. I think the narrative, and maybe by the time this podcast goes out, we might have a bit more clarity over it. But, the narrative as we are, now coming out of Christmas and the New Year, And what are we, 6 months into a new government? The narrative I hear a lot is, oh, the SEND system is broken, and there's a lot of reports coming out about it, and there's a lot of, it's the thing that is at the top of our leaders, our school leaders' minds. I do think that, Dale. I think that if you ask them, I think it's it's the thing that's one of their biggest challenges. But the select committee have set up the investigation in the sort of the review of it with a solution focused. They're saying a solution focused approach. So maybe by the time a couple of months comes and this is out, we'll have a little bit more clarity. But I think we've got to have some systemic changes. We have to, all of us, look at things in differently, and we have to look at things in a more inclusive way. But we also are going to need that. So we're going to have to really look at our own system, our own school, our own local authority. Government needs to look at what they do, and I think also accept that this isn't going to be a quick fix.
No, there's lots of things, and it is a big complex, especially around neurodiversity. It's not something that a policy change which will fix in 3 weeks. It's going to take years to kind of do, and it's not a case of, if you think about children's engagement in school and the attendance, is children are voting with their feet and not getting out of bed, that school isn't working for them, or school is not an enjoyable place to be, school is not a safe place to be. And rather than just punishing, we've got to literally listen and going, so what is it that has to change? What is it schools have to change to make those children feel differently about school? What can we do? How can we change? How can we meet the needs of these children better? Rather than saying, this is our offering, you need to accept it.
I agree. Absolutely, 100%. How can we meet the needs of all of our children? What can we do? We need to be restless in our approach, I think, for that.
Definitely. And I'm going to wrap it up there. And I could keep talking for hours. I really could.
Gosh, we've gone all over the place.
We do. It's the name of the game of the podcast. Here's what we're trying to talk about. And then I should really rate each podcast and how well we kept on track. Because one of the ones I did, it was with Helen. And I literally got ended up, I went, we talked about nothing that we wanted to talk about. We're going to have to re-record this podcast, actually talking about what we intended to talk about. That was a really 0 out of 10 for staying on topic. So thank you for coming on that. Really enjoyed it.
Well, I really enjoyed that as well. Thank you.
Good. It's our aim of the game. You've given me some links to share. So information about the framework with a blog, and there's a vlog. And there's also contact details for the Schools Alliance for Excellence and so on, and the LinkedIn page and stuff. And you'll find the show notes, as always, wherever you listen to the podcast or on the SENDcast website. So thank you for listening to the show. If you haven't subscribed already, please subscribe. And you'll find links to subscribe across all the different platforms wherever you're listening to it. Everyone knows B Squared for helping schools to show the small steps of progress pupils with SEND make. And over the last few years, we've been creating an inclusive assessment system that can be used for all pupils. One system for everyone. The system has different levels of details, of different levels of ability, but it makes looking at whole school data and comparing your SEND pupils and your non-SEND pupils really, really simple. It also reduces teacher workload by only having one system to use, and new features to simplify report writing, and finally, it saves schools money. If you're interested and want to find out more, you can find a link to the website or to book a meeting with me in the show notes. You can also find out about our online training, our videos, our webinars, our blog. It's all on the B Squared website. So thank you for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the SENDcast. It is goodbye from me.
Goodbye from me. Lovely to be here, Dale.
Bye, everyone. You are welcome.